When Star Rail first released, there were many facets about its world that we just didn't fully understand. The Aeons, the many factions that followed them, and even the paths had many mysteries surrounding them. One area of the lore that had very little exposition are those related to the Emanators. Individuals with powers granted directly by the god like Aeons who stand far above the mortals of Star Rail's universe. As the story has progressed though, more about them have slowly come to light, and we are even starting to see some of the Emanators being involved in the main story. But who exactly are these individuals? Why does a person become one, and how powerful are they really? That's what we'll be discussing in this video, every detail we have on them as well as all the currently known Emanators. Before we explore that though, if you want to see more Honkai Star Rail content, do consider subscribing to the channel. Now usually, before I start my rambles, I'd warn you of any spoilers the video might have. However, for the majority of this video, most of the things I'll be talking about won't technically spoil anything, at least not a majority of the main story. You can consider them as spoilers, but only one or two of the characters that I'll be talking about will have any real impact on the current story. So if you want to outright avoid any and all spoilers, then I'd suggest getting caught up with the story first. A while back, I made a video talking about what an Emanator is. At the time, we knew very little about these enigmatic characters, and there were very few confirmed Emanators as well. This made trying to figure out patterns related to them rather difficult, but we've since learned a bit more about them. So you can kind of think of this as an updated video on that topic. Before we talk about the individuals themselves, let me just briefly go through what an Emanator is for those of you who aren't aware. Those who resonate sufficiently with a path can eventually gain access to the imaginary energy that makes up said path. This is how the majority of individuals in Star Rail gain access to elemental powers and special abilities. The more you are able to pull from the path, the more potent your abilities become, with the Aeons being the ones that can pull the most amount of power from these paths. An Emanator is slightly different from a pathstrider in that their powers are granted directly from the Aeons themselves. This means that you don't necessarily have to be a pathstrider to be an Emanator, but most of them usually are. Ultimately, their powers still come from the path itself, but there are seemingly less restrictions to becoming an Emanator outside of just grabbing the attention of an Aeon, which is easier said than done to be honest. The Aeons can functionally choose whoever they want to grant powers to, but the degree and frequency in which they do so depends on the Aeons themselves. Some view their Emanators as extension of themselves or the will of their paths and would grant powers to those who are similar to them, at least in nature or personality. Others have no intention in creating Emanators at all, while a select few functionally do whatever they want. That said, given that all Aeons are bound by the Primum Mobile, the law which forces them to act in a way that befits their path, it's likely that their choice may be influenced by the will of the path itself, rather than just randomly. As I've mentioned, you don't need to be a pathstrider or follow any single path to be granted these abilities. It's entirely at the prerogative of the Aeon. Aha, as you might know, infamously made a random noblesse worm an Emanator, or at least granted it enough power to rival one, despite the worm being barely sentient before receiving Aha's so-called gift. So essentially, the Emanators are those that have received powers and abilities directly from an Aeon. Some of them were previously pathstriders and devout followers, while others could just be any random individual. Because they have received powers from the Aeon themselves, they are often far stronger and more capable than vanilla pathstriders. This is why most within a faction would often follow the direction of an Emanator, as they are often thought to be the closest to the Aeon, regardless of the reasoning behind why they were made into one. Now that you have a general understanding of what Emanators are, let's talk about the ones that we know. I'll only be talking about the ones that we have names for and the factions they belong to, so if I don't mention a particular faction, like the Equilibrium for example, it just means that we haven't been introduced to an Emanator from that faction, and not that there are no Emanators amongst them. Let's start off with someone who was mentioned to be an Emanator fairly early into the game, Herta, who is an Emanator of erudition. While those among the Genius Society are often considered to all be Emanators, there is only one member that has actually been confirmed as such, Herta. Herta's position as an Emanator was confirmed when we first entered the Herta space station and interacted with her portrait, which states that she is an Emanator of Nous. What often throws people off with Herta is that the character we have in-game seems generally weak and is a 4-star character, but in truth, the one we have is just one of her many puppets. The true Herta is likely someone far stronger, but it's unlikely we'll be meeting her anytime soon. For the Path of Nihility, there is currently only one confirmed Emanator, which I think most of you would already know by now. I mean, she was part of the main story in Penacony 2.1 and a large part of her marketing. Yes, I'm talking about Acheron, who is the only currently known Emanator for the Path of Nihility. Specifically, she's a self-annihilator. Now, I've talked about Acheron a lot on this channel, so if you want to learn more about her past, you can check out some of my other videos. I'm just going to move on to the next group. The IPC are one of the main followers of the Aeon of Preservation, Qlipoth. Their organization is essentially one that spans galaxies, as they have businesses in many different industries and star systems. Not to mention, they functionally print the Star Rail universe's money. Given they are functionally a business, their structure appears much like any corporate organization with trustee boards and department heads. While there are tens of thousands of employees working for the IPC, the emanators of these factions are those that sit at higher management positions within the company, and we really only know 2 of them. The first is Diamond, who is the chief lead of the strategic investment department and functionally the person that Aventurine, Topaz, and Jade all report to. While it's unconfirmed, it's highly speculated that the cornerstones are fabrications of Diamond himself, and if you've seen what those things can do, you can imagine how powerful Diamond himself is. The second person from the IPC confirmed to be an Emanator is one of the 7 Board of Trustees member, Taravan Keen. Unlike Diamond, we know even less about Taravan, as he was only briefly mentioned during Topaz and Aventurine's discussion, but since he was mentioned as an Emanator, I'll just include him here as well. I also largely believe that most of the trustee board members of the IPC are in fact Emanators, as some of them have been assisting Qlipoth since even before the IPC was called the IPC, but this isn't something that has been confirmed. So far, the currently known Emanators from Erudition, Nihility, and Preservation number in the handfuls. The Destruction Path, however, actually has quite a few named and confirmed Emanators. The Lord Ravagers of the Antimatter Legion are all said to be Emanators, and each is capable of destroying planets and even galaxies. Of the 7 or 8 Lord Ravagers, 6 of them have already been named, but we've only really met Fentilia. The rest of them, like Selenova, Iron Tomb, Zephyro, and the Sun Devourer, are all indeed confirmed to be Emanators, but will likely show up only later in the story given we are expected to have a final showdown with Destruction at some point. As far as I can tell, these select few are the only people we know who are confirmed to be Emanators and still alive within the current setting. There are a few that are confirmed to be Emanators but no longer alive, such as Xandar Kuwabara for Erudition, who was the first member of the Genius Society and the creator of Nous, and Zulo, the Lord Ravager that the Galaxy Rangers defeated. There's also Shu Hu, who was an Emanator of Abundance. Shu Hu is particularly interesting, as everything bad that has happened on the Xianzhou Luofu, especially those that relate to the High Cloud Quintet, was in some way connected to Shu Hu. All 3 of them, though, are mentioned to no longer be around at the time of the current story. Now, as far as we know, these are the only Emanators that have canonically been confirmed. There are, however, a few characters that are suspected to be Emanators due to either their backstory or abilities, but their actual status has never been verified. The swarm bug that Ruanmei created was said to have been a clone of an Emanator. I'm not sure if I can really consider it as a traditional Emanator given they were artificially created. If an Emanator was cloned, would they still have the same powers their Aeon granted them with originally, or rather granted to the original Emanator? I don't know. Plus, the Aeon of Propagation, Tezeronth, no longer exists, so it makes it a bit more dubious that the powers the Aeon granted previously would still exist somewhere. So perhaps Ruanmei's creation was more of an Emanator equivalent, rather than an actual one, despite being mentioned as an Emanator. March 7th has also been theorized to be an Emanator of the Remembrance, given her rather odd origin story and that the Garden of Recollection memo keepers are actively trying to stop her from discovering her past. Given Dan Heng has received his 5-star glow up and the main character is likely going to be a Swiss Army knife of path powers by the end, it's probably likely that March is going to have a similar treatment. A power up doesn't necessarily mean she's an Emanator though, and why it's only suspected. Another potential character I rather like the idea of being an Emanator is Polka Kakamon, the faceless Genius Society serial killer. We know very little about her, but there are some rather compelling theories that she is now affiliated with the Enigmata, and the fact she is able to obscure her appearance throughout all space and time further lends to this idea. To be able to also kill some of the smartest geniuses in the universe just speaks volumes of her true abilities and perhaps newly gained powers. If the Genius Society members are confirmed to all be Emanators, then perhaps only an Emanator can oppose them. But again, since we haven't really met her or learned much about her, we can't really be sure. Next up, we have Locha. Now, Locha has been on several occasions suspected to be an Emanator of Abundance. He's able to heal others beyond physical limitations like what he did with Shui, understands the abundance quite intimately, and he's received an invalid rating by the rating gun, something Acheron received as well. Of course, he isn't confirmed at the moment to be one, and his abilities may be more related to that coffin that he carries around, but there's still the possibility that despite not liking the abundance, he was given powers forcibly, like what Aha did to the worm. So Locha being an Emanator of Abundance is certainly possible, but unconfirmed. Another group that are suspected to be Emanators but just never outright mentioned are the Cloud Generals of the Xianzhou Alliance. Each of the generals have an immense amount of power, but it's unclear whether their abilities come from Lan, the Aeon of the Hunt, or some other sources. On one hand, the generals do directly deal with Lan, but on the other hand, Jingyuan was said to have inherited his powers from the previous general. So they likely could be, but again, unconfirmed at this point. I know I sound like a broken record. Finally, we have Black Swan. Now, I know some of you are going to say she is indeed an Emanator, and that most memo keepers are. I mean, there are actually mentions of this, as when the messenger first boarded the Astral Express, you can actually tell Wealth about it. His response is that the Emanators of the Remembrance don't really have a physical body, and only those they allow can actually see them, which sounds quite similar to how memo keepers are described. This makes the probability of Black Swan being an Emanator indeed high, as she is a memo keeper and has been with the Garden of Recollection for a long time. The only problem is that it hasn't been outright mentioned. So short of someone saying, hey look, it's Black Swan, the Emanator, I'm going to refrain from claiming that she is. And that's functionally all the Emanators we know of currently, along with some very likely candidates. Before I close off this video though, I would like to remind you that when it comes to the Emanators, there's still a lot we don't know. The story is progressing into areas where we would have started to hear about these characters, but not directly interact with them. So if you're watching this in the future, just know that things might have changed by that time. The Emanators are likely to be the next level of allies and antagonists we will have to face, and I honestly can't wait to see what they can do, given they are functionally a step below the literal gods of the universe. Until then though, we can only speculate on who and what they are. That brings the video to an end. Let me know in the comments if I've left out any confirmed Emanators, and share your theories on who you think might be an Emanator. If you enjoyed watching the video, do consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and as usual, have a nice day.